Well, if Brexit is all about taking back control, MPs appear to have finally taken it to heart. Tory rebels joined the opposition to defeat Theresa May for the second time in 24 hours after a key decision by the Speaker of the House. He enabled MPs to vote for an amendment, which means that if Mrs May's deal is finally defeated next Tuesday, she'll have to come up with Plan B within 3 days. And MPs could then hold non-binding votes on what should happen next. Brexiteer Tories vented fury at Speaker John Bercow for allowing a vote on that amendment at all. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Today was meant to be all eyes on take two of the debate on the Prime Minister's Brexit divorce bill, resumed after it was called off in December, because number 10 was terrified of a huge Commons defeat. But instead, the focus shifted to how quickly Theresa May's plan could be killed off in favour of other options that soften, delay or even stop Brexit. That, thanks to someone from a household that owns this car with this sticker.
I'm trying to do the right thing and to make the right judgments.
Overnight, the Speaker decided to break with precedent, overrule his senior clerk and massively irritate the government. He accepted an amendment that tries to kill off the Prime Minister's Brexit divorce bill the moment it's defeated, allowing the Commons to start looking at other options.
I think it would be very helpful to the House if you can confirm that your decision was taken in the full advice and agreement of the Clerk of the House of Commons. And perhaps to help the House, you might agree to publish the advice so that the House can understand the reason for your decision. Thank you.
Cabinet ministers don't normally stand up and take on the Speaker, but these are not normal times.
That advice is tendered to me privately, and that's absolutely proper. If we were guided only by precedent, manifestly nothing in our procedures would ever change.
Government ministers shook their heads. Brexiteers said the Speaker was biased in favour of Remainers.
We've all noticed in recent months a sticker in your car making derogatory comments about Brexit. No, this is a serious point about partiality.
That sticker on the subject of Brexit happens to be affixed to or in the windscreen of my wife's car.
Critics of Brexit believe the decision could mean the spotlight is thrown on other, softer approaches, much quicker.
That the House of Commons is taking back control is something to be welcomed rather than feared.
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 297.
MPs inflicted the second defeat on the government in 2 days. The author of the amendment had no doubt what it meant. Inevitably, as a result of today, we're going to have you would think, a softer Brexit or a second referendum or a delay in Article 50.
Yes, and I think that is, broadly speaking, what a majority of the House of Commons wants. One of those things.
Some think control of Brexit policy could be shifting decisively to a cabal of cross-party MPs.
Are you running it? Collectively, potentially, quite soon.
Well, let's not. We have to take each day and each step at a time. But I think there will come a moment.
Not dismissing that notion.
Well, I think there will come. Well, I don't think it's the case yet. The government is very much. It's the government. It's in charge. It's in charge of the business of the House. But I think what last night and today's vote have shown is actually, without a majority in the House of Commons, it is possible for the government to start losing votes.
One minister said the government would simply bring back Theresa May's deal again if it was defeated next week. Some Brexiteers doubt any cross-party alliance of backbenchers will be able to trump their prize, the Brexit date in law, coming in March.
If destiny is yours, you're relaxed.
I'm not relaxed, but I think it is an absolute imperative, a democratic imperative, that Parliament delivers on the referendum result which Parliament decided to have.
In number 10 tonight, a drinks party for Tory MPs, partners invited too. Alongside them, some DUP MPs. A moment to put aside differences before some try to destroy the Prime Minister's Brexit handiwork next week.
And Gary is with me now. Well, has nothing changed or everything?
Well, we saw something approaching a parliamentary riot, which you don't normally see. It's as close as that place probably gets to things like that, with the amount of disorder there was in the chamber and turning on the Speaker and the rest of it. A lot of football analogies being used, people sort of suggesting that the Speaker has been behaving like a referee who's gently rolling the ball to one particular side. But can that side make use of the ball? What the Speaker people think has done effectively And what the vote has done, that the Speaker allowed and the defeat of the government, is shorten the timetable for the Prime Minister to try to rescue her deal if it has been defeated. Effectively, it increases the possibility, people think, of the last rites being read on the Prime Minister's deal. That's what some of the pro-Remainers and people who least like the deal and least like no deal think. But can they use that time, can they use that place somehow to come up with an alternative? That is the $60 million question. It hasn't been answered by what happened there today, and it remains a completely open one. And I think the interesting thing, as you talk to MPs after the hubbub had calmed down and maybe they'd had a drink or a cup of coffee or something, the Brexiteers seem calm. They do not seem to feel that this, for all the hubbub, for all the anger at the Speaker in there today, has jeopardised their project. They're still going around saying, we're the ones who've got something in law, something in statute, a Brexit date. How on earth do you get a bunch of backbenchers to somehow pass a law when that generally is something that only governments get to do?
Thanks, Gary. Well, with me now is the Minister for Prisons, Rory Stewart, who has been a doughty defender of Theresa May's deal, locked in a sort of a vortex of defence for the past few weeks. I mean, have you now lost control of this? Parliament is exerting itself.
Well, Parliament's definitely exerting itself, but we haven't left the fundamentals here, which are there are only three choices. There's either staying in the European Union, or there's no deal, or there's a withdrawal agreement. And what's strange about all of this is that we're probably, I'm prepared to bet, going to end up with some version of the Prime Minister's deal. That all of this stuff that's happening can't get around the fundamentals. There's only one thing that's been negotiated with 27 member states. There's only one 500-page document. And if you want a Brexit deal, it's going to look like this.
Will the deal definitely go ahead on Tuesday? I mean, now that your ability to go away and renegotiate something has been shortened from 21 days to 3 days, is there any other way you can procrastinate and spin this out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the key is to procrastinate and spinning out, but you're right, the 3 days is challenging. I mean, if you lost a vote and you try to go back to the European Union, obviously 3 days isn't long enough to renegotiate, which is why I'm not quite sure what exactly people think they're doing.
Well, the deal will be dead, won't it, by Friday?
Oddly, many of the people who rebelled and voted for this say that they believe we have to have the withdrawal agreement because it's the only route to Norway or Canada or the customs union, whatever you want. They're also saying the political declaration is broad and generous and encompassing. So what is it they really want? I can understand Dominic
what
Green.
they all believe, as you know, is that Article 50 can be extended. Is that the next move?
It's not clear what they think the next move is. I mean, that's why
whatever happens, you need more time.
What the backbenchers are doing is a little eccentric. I mean, I've just been speaking to one of them, and essentially he has some idea that this will magically mean that Labour and Conservatives are all going to sit down and come to some wonderful consensus. Well, I hope so, and that's what I've been trying to argue for the last few months, which is a middle ground, pragmatic, moderate decision. I'd love to embrace moderate Labour MPs, but it's quite difficult to overcome the party politics, and I'm not sure this trick in Parliament is going to necessarily do that.
But it's a bit odd you asking them for their next move. I mean, the question is, what's your next move? You know, when this is defeated on Tuesday as expected, what's the plan B? That's the question that the government has repeatedly refused to answer.
Well, the answer is that when you ask what is the plan B, people generally mean that they want to stay in the European Union. Most of the people asking that question either want to stay in the European Union
or some want to renegotiate, some want a different kind of deal.
Yeah, renegotiate different kind of deal, that's less convincing. I mean, plan Bs which are no deal or plan Bs which are stay in the EU, they make sense.
Well, there's Norway as well. I mean, there are all sorts of options is the point.
If you wanted
your job is to come up with what your option is.
So if you want any of those options, Norway, Canada, whatever, you've got to go through the withdrawal agreement. There's nothing in this withdrawal agreement which stops you getting Norway or Canada at the end of this. We just have to get the withdrawal agreement through.
Right, so if Parliament, after, let's say the initial vote is defeated, 3 days passes, and then MPs decide to introduce amendments that enable them to indicate what they would support. And suppose MPs do coalesce around something and say, right, this is what we want. Will the government respect that and do it?
Well, obviously, if a majority of MPs powerfully came out in favour of something, and there's a second part of this, there was any credible chance of 27 European member states agreeing to that, then yes, you have the beginnings of a workable deal.
So if Parliament votes for Norway or Norway Plus, the government would then enact that, because we are clear that Europe would accept that.
I'm afraid, to be absolutely honest, there is no majority for anything in Parliament. What will happen with these indicative votes, and this is why this is a bit of a distraction, is that you will find there's no majority for anything, and then we'll have to come back to...
But I'm asking you, if there is a majority for something, will the government respect it, or is it conceivable that the government could ignore it?
I think the government would listen, obviously have
It would
to
have
listen
to
very
listen to
carefully
Parliament,
to a
wouldn't it?
majority of Parliament, because we need two things. We need Europe to agree, and we need a majority in Parliament for something.
So that means no deal is impossible, because the one thing we do know that there is no majority for now is no deal.
Nothing, unfortunately, is impossible. There's no majority at the moment, it feels like, for very much. I think there are more votes for the Prime Minister's deal than anything else, but it doesn't feel at the moment as though there's a majority for anything. I wouldn't roll no deal out.
If one of those votes next week is against no deal, again, you will have to respect that, won't you? You can't carry on with this facade, this pretense that it's deal or no deal.
So what I hope will happen next week is that we will find that there is not a majority for no deal, and there is not a majority for a second referendum. And if that happens, logically, then you're right. We're in the territory of a deal. And then we can have a grown-up discussion about how you do a withdrawal agreement, whether you want to end up with Canada, whether you end up with Norway.
But I'm asking you to rule out no deal, because I'm saying to you...
And potentially as
if Parliament votes against no deal...
And potentially a second referendum too, if they voted against second referendum. I mean, if that's the way that this works. I think it would be very helpful if Parliament said they don't want no deal, because I don't think there's anything like a majority for no deal. They don't want a second referendum, so what we want is a Brexit deal. And then when we start talking about a Brexit deal, it's going to look surprisingly like this deal, at which point this whole thing looks a bit bizarre.
Do you believe the Speaker, John Bercow, is an honest broker?
Well, I think what he did was pretty strange and unprecedented. I mean, if you want to be generous to him, I guess he feels this is a great national issue and therefore he's going to make unprecedented moves. But I think it was a curious thing for...
to give MPs a vote?
No, curious thing for a referee to do, who's meant to be impartial, to change...
Do you think he took sides?
To change parliamentary rules without going through the procedure committee is a strange thing to do in Parliament.
Which parliamentary rules did he change?
Well, normally the procedure committee would determine on whether or not you allow an amendment on a programme motion. I mean, I'm not an expert on the internal stuff of this, but what he did was not a normal thing for a speaker to do, and he chose to do it in the middle of probably the most febrile, contested debate in British politics since the Second World War. So maybe it would have been better to have some other process for coming to that decision.
Well, with me now is the Labour MP Hilary Benn, who's chair of the Brexit Select Committee, and Jeremy Corbyn, we understand, is giving a major speech tomorrow. Is he going to call for a delay to the Article 50 process?
I don't know. Well, we'll have to wait and see what he says. But if the government's deal is defeated next week, then I very strongly support Parliament then being able to vote on a range of options. I think that's us doing our job. And the sounds and the sights today in the House of Commons was Parliament exercising control. And that is a good thing, because it means we're doing our job in the face of the crisis that we have got because of the way in which the government has handled Brexit.
I mean, you heard Rory Stewart there saying that Parliament would have to be respected. I mean, the Brexiteers are going around saying, well, none of this matters, you know, because it's not a binding vote that you'd have next week, and Brexit can go ahead.
Well, of course Parliament has to be respected, because if the government were to say, well, that was all very interesting, but we're going off and doing something else, what does democracy in the House of Commons mean? Point number one. Point number two is, there is no way that even this government is going to walk the country over the economic cliff at the end of March by leaving with no deal. No one believes that they will do it. We're not ready. The consequences will be very severe for businesses, and I don't believe the government will do it, and there certainly is not a majority in the House of Commons for allowing it to happen.
Is it not extraordinary to you as a former Labour cabinet minister that you don't know what your leader's position on Brexit is?
Well, no, you asked me very specifically, do I know what he's going to say
tomorrow? You don't know what he's
going
to say tomorrow.
I don't know,
it's supposed to be a major policy speech on Brexit.
I haven't seen his speech.
Right. Do you know what he thinks about a second referendum?
Well, what we've said very clearly is, first of all, we'd like an election.
Yes.
I know, and there may be a vote of no confidence in the government after the Prime Minister's deal is defeated, if that's what happens. And then Labour Party conference is very clear, all other options should remain on the table. My view is we should vote first to see whether there is an alternative that can command a majority in the House of Commons. But if that is not possible, then I can't see any way out of this other than to take the choices back to the British people.
There are some people saying that there's something very alarming going on, that you and Nicky Morgan and the other people behind these parliamentary moves are effectively running the country from the back benches, that you're usurping the role of the government.
Well, if the government was doing its job properly, then it wouldn't be in this mess. But it has failed spectacularly, and it's managed to come back with a deal that doesn't have the support of Leavers or Remainers either, because they failed to take Parliament with them. That's the lesson of the last 2 years. There was 2 years of squabbling in the Cabinet, and the government didn't think to say, how can we, in the end, create a consensus in the House of Commons?
So you are taking control?
Well, we're doing our job. We are elected as parliamentarians to do our job, and this is a crisis for the country. We have to find a way of resolving it, and if the government can't do its job, then parliamentarians will do it for them.
But you're not the executive, they are. They're supposed to be in control.
No, but
what you're saying is you're taking control from them.
What I'm saying is that in the end, the government puts propositions to us, and we can support them or reject them. We can also seek to give the government instructions about what it should do next. And as Rory Stewart, I think, accepted, if the House, for example, were to vote very clearly to say no deal is not going to happen, we don't accept it, the government surely must respect that. That's not us running the country from the back benches. That's us saying to the government, we will not support this.
So what are the amendments you're going to propose next week, then? I mean, you said you think indicative votes would be a good idea.
Well, there are two stages to this. There are the amendments that are already down to the government's withdrawal agreement next week. I've got one that rejects the government's deal, but also rejects no deal. And if the Speaker selects that, then I hope the House will support it. If and when the government's deal is defeated, then I think the House of Commons needs to move very swiftly to ask itself, of the other options, a Canada-type deal, a Norway plus a customs union, remain and process, should we go back to the British people, should there be an extension to Article 50, we need to test the will of the House at that point to see what there may be a majority for. We've got to get on with it very quickly because time is running out.
So you think Parliament could effectively, by the end of next week, start knocking out different options, saying we don't want no deal, we don't want this, we don't want that, and whittling it down?
Well, technically, the amendment that was passed today says the government must table the motion within 3 sitting days. It doesn't necessarily follow that the debate will happen within 3 sitting days. But look, the ball will be in the court of the Prime Minister because the whole nation will look to her and say, your deal's been defeated, what are you going to do now? But in the absence of leadership from the Prime Minister, then I think Parliament needs to be taking that control and trying to see whether it's possible to forge a consensus.
So just explain that process. You're saying, most people don't know what the difference is between tabling a motion and laying it down and all the rest of it. Are you saying this could be spun out for weeks more?
Well, I don't think
before you get to actually vote on it?
No, I don't think it can be spun out because we simply do not have the time. Now, if the Prime Minister were to say, well, given where we are, I'm going to seek to extend Article 50, that would buy us a bit more time. But we've got to get on with it. And the first thing we should do if our deal is defeated is to see, is there something that Parliament will support? Because in the end, there has to be something around which the House or finally, possibly the country has to coalesce.
Hilary Benn, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tewkesbury, the Cotswolds' medieval market town where once a fierce battle heralded a period of political stability in the Wars of the Roses. In the long-running conflict over Brexit, what hopes here then of political repair and tranquility in the months ahead?
It's a new year. Are you feeling optimistic about Brexit and the politicians being able to sort it?
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
And why?
Why? Because I've got an optimistic nature.
Who knows? I really don't know, to be honest.
No, I don't think so. I think it's getting worse since Christmas.
In the Commons, the government endured yet another defeat today. The clamour of parliamentary warnings over leaving the EU without a deal grows louder. MPs against a no-deal exit are rallying. So do Leave voters here share those fears about exiting without a deal?
What about the idea that there could be a no-deal scenario?
Well, we get through things, don't we?
But what about the delays at the ports,
yes,
about
yes,
tariffs,
yes,
trade tariffs?
But we have no idea whether having a deal might involve lots of horrendous things as well. I think before the election and since, the information the public has been given has been extremely poor.
Some people are warning that, Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, said it would be a catastrophe if we crashed out without a deal.
Well, they said it would be a catastrophe when we voted to come out, let alone now. This is Project Fear still going on.
If we do leave the EU without a deal, would you see that as a threat or as an opportunity?
I think it could be an opportunity if the people that are in power take the opportunity to steer us in the right direction, but who knows whether they will.
Too much scaremongering, said some, but the idea of an exit without a deal didn't sit comfortably with this Leave voter.
I just don't want us to be in a no-deal scenario.
Why not?
I just feel that it's, for the sake of manufacturing, I think, more than anything else, and for the sake of business, we'll be left in limbo, and I don't think many companies have actually prepared for that scenario. I think there are too many companies that are expecting something to happen, and they're not prepared for that, and so then I think we're actually all going to find ourselves in a very difficult situation.
Frustration with the political class, as so often elsewhere, was freely expressed here today. Admissions too that the whole Brexit debate felt incomprehensible. Final word then to the Leave voter we met, who described herself as optimistic by nature.
I just hope that all the politicians of all parties will pull together for the sake of the country.
And if they don't?
Then we're in a bloody mess.